So let's touch on a lot of the positivity that we've actually seen. Uganda experiencing an interest rate cut last week. We know that it was quite controversial. We actually saw the Ugandan shilling coming under pressure on the back of this, but a very good impact that it had on the overall equity market.
I'd say not necessarily that well received. In fact, the Ugandan market saw a bit of a sell-off last week, around about 5%. Essentially, there are a lot of Kenyan investors involved in the Ugandan market. They seem to be seeing better value in Kenya. In fact, they're actually taking capital, it seems, away from Uganda at the moment into the Kenyan market. But Uganda, I think, essentially is still inflation pretty high. A few question marks about the monetary policy there, and so essentially just a few doubts still, and very much still very positive.
So on a weekly basis, Ugandan market down around 5%.
Around about 5%.
Let's also touch on what we see in the Kenyan market. We actually saw very positive results released, especially coming through from the banking sector. There is this view, a very big fear with regards to the interest rate environment. They could actually see suppressed banking earnings, but overall it seems that it's looking good.
Feeling very rosy in Kenya at the moment. I think about 10 consecutive days worth of gains. Excellent set of results from KCB last week, up around about 54%. EABL, excellent results. BAT, excellent results. So it just seems that the whole macro feeling in Kenya feels pretty good at the moment. Talking about an interest rate decrease, the market's expecting 1.5%. Possibly tomorrow. Inflation looks like the authorities are getting inflation under control. So Kenya feels good at the moment.
Okay, so Nigeria, pretty much a flat performance, no extensive move to the up or to the downside, but we are expecting some positive results out of the banking sector. And in fact, banks as a whole have been enjoying gains. Is this set to continue? Very
much so. Another week's worth of gains out of the Nigerian banks, pretty much, especially the second tiers. Very good demand for Access Bank at the moment, but I think turnovers in Nigeria have been fairly light, around about $10 million. Investors still sitting on the fence, waiting for results, full year earnings to come out next week. In the next week.
Are you expecting overall Kenya and Nigeria to be very positive markets into this year? It seems that those are the markets we actually really focus on.
Kenya's got off to a great start, and likewise Nigeria. We're seeing great demand from our clients for the Nigerian stocks. I do believe at this point it's set to continue into the year.
I'd like to touch on Egypt, because Egypt, no real dramatic performance last week, but it has been one of the best performing bourses so far this year. Do you think that momentum is going to start slowing down? I mean, we've had 1 week of no real movement. What kind of expectation do you have going forward?
Yeah, I think obviously the market had priced in so much bad news at the end of last year that essentially we couldn't help but to have some kind of an early year rally. But I think investors are sort of coming to the senses now. They're saying 20-30% up on the year. Is there real value there? And I think investors are starting to take a closer look now.
Absolutely. Well, let's just touch on what we see in Zimbabwe. Also very much a political scenario that is playing out and could be playing out towards the equity market's favour, because we're starting to see a big focus coming through on ensuring there's enough liquidity in the market.
Absolutely. Liquidity in Zimbabwe has pretty much dried up to around about probably $600,000 or $700,000 a day. Still a lot of indigenization concerns in Zimbabwe, and essentially the Zimplats thing is very much under the spotlight at the moment. Yeah. Banks are being taken a good look at the moment.
Would you say that banks could actually be the best performers into this year if we see a liquidity push?
In Zimbabwe?
Yeah.
I think there are a few concerns hanging over the banks in terms of the liquidity situation in Zimbabwe. Also the multinational banks with talk of indigenization, there are investor worries in that sector.
I mean, so we're seeing worries not only in the banking sector but also within the mining industry. So it seems that it could actually be a very negative scenario that plays out. If we start to see significant policy changes, I mean, how is this going to then change investor sentiment? Because we're seeing foreign participation starting to slump as things go on.
Very much so. Zimbabwe is a market that's completely dominated by politics. Structural changes need to happen in Zimbabwe before we start seeing the big investors coming back, I think.
Let's just delve into Uganda once again. What kind of performance are you expecting into this year? We know that Egypt is expected to be one of the best performing bourses into this year. We know that some of these other economies are also doing quite well. Even though they're dealing with very high interest rates and high inflationary environment, things could start to stabilize.
I think Uganda is a market that people are going to take a look and see where the monetary authorities are positioning themselves. If we start seeing some sensible monetary policy in Uganda, I think the investors will come.
So when you say sensible monetary policy, what kind of, I mean, are you talking about I mean, inflation is sitting at 25%. We've got interest rates sitting at 21% in Uganda.
I think monetary policy is meant to stay high for a while until inflation comes under control. I think they dropped interest rates a little while ago. Not necessarily the right move at this point.
So you would say that they should have kept rates unchanged?
That's what I believe.
Okay, so let's also touch on Kenya, because we've still got a high inflationary environment, even though we actually started to see a little bit of a decrease in the inflation number. There is this hope that we will actually start to see closer to single-digit inflation into Kenya this year. Is this a likely scenario with fuel prices as high as they are?
Yeah, that's a big question. I think now the Kenyan shilling remains pretty solid at the moment, around about 82, 83. Talks about a cap there. I think really we need to take a good look. I think it's a little bit early to say if inflation will be tamed over the long term. It's a little bit early to say at this point.
I'd also like to touch on the Mauritian market, because we also saw a little bit of negativity coming through there. Hotel stocks are very much under the spotlight because of the decrease in a lot of the volume that we saw in tourists from the Eurozone. Is there an expectation that we could actually see quite a bit of value to be had in the Mauritian market, because there's also this hope that things will start to stabilize in the Eurozone, and hopefully that will also filter through into us who are affected by this?
There's your answer right there. The French tourism market, I mean, it dominates in Mauritius. We need to see clear signs that the Eurozone is in fact turning before we see any real movement in Mauritius.